Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Today we're continuing with the story of Queen Alexandra by Georgiana Badiscon, and we're a little more than halfway done, and I have enjoyed learning about this great lady. So let's see what's going on today. During both her son's absence, an important event happened for for Princess Alexandra. It was the ascension of Uncle Sasha to the Russian throne, and the most tragic of circumstances. In March 1881, the world was shocked by the news of the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. Suddenly, Tsarevich found himself raised to the most elevated and most undesirable position in Christendom. The dangers that surrounded him and his wife were very obvious. When Princess Alexandra heard the news of the death of Tsar Alexander II by a bomb, she was in terror for her darling little Minnie's life. Her alarm was well founded. King Alexander II had been known as a liberator when he freed the serfs. If the liberator was fair game for the assassins, then the Tsarevich was in danger too. The Russian police, in trying to protect the Tsar, made him practically a prisoner in his own palace. His life was believed to be in danger, a danger fully shared by his wife, who seldom if ever left his side. Their marriage had been a happy one. It is said of Alexander III, as the Tsarevich had become, that there were two things he never wished to break: the peace of Europe and the seventh commandment. Lord Dufferin wrote to Queen Victoria, "The new emperor is a very stay-at-home kind of person, devoted to his wife and his children, fond of music, and has hitherto to surround himself with a small circle of very insignificant persons." There is still very little known about him, probably because there is very little to know. In 1881, there was more to know about Alexander than there had been in 1866, the year he married Princess Dagmar, now the Empress Marie Fedorovna. With great tact and perseverance, she had encouraged him to make good some of his enormous gaps in education, persuading him to read serious books, to take an interest in charitable schemes, and to patronize the arts. She was always at his side to help and encourage him, but she did not interfere in politics, concentrating instead on the representational duties of their position, at which it must be admitted that her husband was extraordinarily inept. Even after she had done something to improve his manners, he remained shy and awkward in company. She, on the contrary, frankly enjoyed occasions when she could appear wearing beautiful clothes and fabulous jewels, and she performed her social functions with the same grace and charm that characterized her sister, the Princess of Wales. Whatever may have been true in later years, at this time the new Tsarina was beloved by everybody, her evident popularity giving great delight to her devoted husband. Popularity was no real shield against the dangers she faced, though. These dangers were so real that in England there was an outcry when Queen Victoria allowed both the Prince and Princess of Wales to attend the funeral of the murdered Tsar. The Queen, however, sympathized deeply with the princess's wish to be with her sister at this crisis, and refused to rescind her permission. When they departed for Russia, the princess found it almost as hard to part from her dogs as to part from her children. On this occasion, a particularly beloved animal called Josh was allowed to accompany her as far as Victoria Station. Josh didn't want to be left behind, and just as the train started, when the princess was leaning out the window, waving goodbye, he slipped his collar and started in pursuit. The horrified crowd on the platform watched him chase the train down the line until both the train and the dog were lost in the darkness. Still preserved among the solemn documents in the Royal Archives is a telegram in which young Prince Louise assures her grandmother, the Queen, that Josh had been recovered safe and sound the next morning. When the princess emerged from the royal train after her long journey, Lord Dufferin found her looking so pretty as if she had come out of a bandbox. The St. Petersburg in which she found herself was very different from the gay city she had known on her previous visit. Everyone was in mourning. Little black sleighs glided over the frozen Neva. Black streamers flew from the tramcars. The very lampposts were shrouded in crepe. The princess found that the empress looked thin and ill, her memory haunted by the sight of her father-in-law's mangled body as he had been carried back to the Winter Palace, blown half to pieces but still alive. For security reasons, she and her husband had not moved into this vast palace, where the prince and princess were themselves staying, but remained in their old home of the Anichov Palace. Here the two sisters spent every moment they could together, the empress finding support and comfort in her sister's company. Hundreds of men and women were engaged in digging a trench round the Anichov to frustrate any laying of mines. Meanwhile, the emperor was so closely guarded that for exercise he could only take a walk around a small snow-covered garden no bigger than a backyard. And once a day he was allowed to leave his palace in order to attend a service held beside the coffin of the murdered Tsar in the fortress church of St. Peter and St. Paul. According to Russian custom, the dead man's face was left exposed to be kissed by all of his relatives, a ceremony which they found a terrible ordeal. Not only had the features been damaged by the bomb, but decay had definitely set in before the actual funeral took place. When the last service was over, the members of the prince and princess's suite breathed a sigh of relief, for there had been rumors of mines laid beneath the church and torpedoes embedded in the ice of the frozen river. During the painful days, the princess delighted everyone with her friendliness and astonished them by her beauty. Once the funeral was over, the assembled royalties left Russia as quickly as possible. The princess was determined to stay, although her husband was obligated to return to England. He was reluctant to leave without her. She pleaded with him so persuasively that in the end he even went so far as to take her side when Queen Victoria quite rightly objected to the idea of the Princess of Wales remaining for long exposed to the obvious danger of assassination. As usual, the princess had things her own way. "Never mind, dearest mamma," she wrote the queen in an almost airy strain toward the end of her visit. "I've nearly come to the end now, and through this my poor sister has had a few moments more of happiness. It really was very kind of my Bertie to let me stop, but he knew how much our hearts were set on it, and after all, it would have mattered less if anything had happened to me than to him." I'm not so sure about that. It wasn't until the August of 1882 the princess was to have the pleasure of welcoming her sons home after their long voyage. Almost immediately they were sent off again to spend 6 months in Lausanne in a fruitless endeavor to make them fluent in the French language. Queen Victoria complained that her grandsons could speak no foreign language properly except Danish. It should be pointed out that the fault lay with the boys themselves, not with their parents, who made strenuous efforts to have them taught both French and German. The prince was a remarkably good linguist, a gift which unfortunately his sons did not inherit. In an effort to arouse their interest in a language they found very distasteful, Dalton encouraged the boys to read some of Dumas' exciting stories. This earned him an unexpectedly solemn reproof from the princess. Though I have no doubt that Dumas novels are very interesting, still I cannot help thinking that novels are not useful reading and do the boys no good. In French literature, there are so many useful and more entertaining books in the shape of memoirs and historical works, which would be far better for them. Lamartine's Girardon, for instance, is most interesting. Neither boy made much progress in the French language. Prince George, as usual, far outstripped his brother. On March 11, 1883, the princess wrote to Dalton in real distress about Prince Eddy, now aged 19. It is typical of her that in the middle of all her own anxiety about her son, she does not forget the tutor's hurt and disappointed feelings. She wrote to him, "Although you kindly beg me not to distress myself about the contents of your last letter, I cannot, I confess, help being very much grieved by the unsatisfactory account you are unfortunately obligated to give me of Eddy. It is indeed a bitter disappointment that instead of steadily improving, as we hoped he had begun to do during the first half of his stay at Lausanne, he should have relapsed into his old habits of indolence and inattention. It does indeed seem strange that at his age he does not yet see the great importance of exerting himself to the utmost, and lets his precious time slip by, which can never be recalled. But what pains me more than all this is his seeming ingratitude towards you, who, although you have always taken so humble and unselfish a view of your own services, have really devoted the best years of your life for his welfare, and have thought no trouble too great as long as it can conduce to the good of the boys. Believe me, although I can well understand how disheartening it appears to you at this moment, that Eddy is not so insensible as you think to all the good and devotion he owes to you, and that all the trouble you take is only for his own sake and as a true friend towards him. At any rate, I feel sure he will someday appreciate at its proper value all the sacrifices you have made on his behalf. The princess was devoted to her elder son, but she was all too well aware of his shortcomings, and she made no attempt to hide them either from herself or from other people. As she wrote this same year of 1883 in another letter to Dalton, "We are neither of us blind to his faults." I will end the video here. In this episode, it was very interesting to learn more about how Princess's sister was doing in Russia, how her father-in-law was killed by a bomb, and how her husband became the new ruler. She was very supportive of him and helped him in many ways. Princess Alexandra went there for the funeral as well as her husband. It was a dangerous time, and everyone was nervous that more bombs might go off while they were there for the funeral. Luckily, all went well. Princess Alexandra stayed longer to support her sister, and it showed how close they were. The episode ends with the princess having to deal with her own son, Eddie, and his troubles at school. It's never a dull moment in the royal family, it seems. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.